we need to really go inward and sit with that and be like, is this actually what I'm experiencing? Like, do I feel like I have chemistry and compatibility with this person? How do they make me feel?
Welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Relationships. I have been anticipating this episode for a couple of weeks now, and I'm honestly like giddy excited about my guest today. So today we have Emily Goff. She is a human connection specialist. She's a coach, fantastic coach, and she's also a podcast host. Her podcast, it's called Room to Grow, is actually how I found her. I was researching the topic of why healthy love can feel boring. That's kind of what I was looking for. And she happened to actually be one of the first things that popped up. And it was her episode. There was two that I've already like re-listened to them a couple times because they've been so phenomenal. There was two. It was one called When Healthy Love Feels Scary, and the other was Learning to Open and Receive Love in a Healthy Relationship. And this is the topic I've been kind of researching quite a bit over the last couple months. I had a previous episode where we talked about why do we go for toxic people, right? Why are we so attracted to toxicity? And so today we're actually going to talk about what does a healthy relationship feel like? Because I don't think we really recognize that it may not always feel like a fairy tale. And so I'm so excited, Emily. Thank you so much for giving me your time and for allowing a complete stranger, to chat with you and to bring you on her podcast. So I'd love to introduce you and just love to hear more about who you are. Tell my guests who you are, what you do. I know you do a lot of you do coaching, but you also do a lot of seminars and different things like that. So love to hear more about you.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for having me, Beatrice. I'm absolutely delighted. This is just so much fun. And, as soon as you reached out, I was like, oh my gosh, this girl's energy. Like, yes, I want more of this. So super excited to be here. Yes. So I have been doing relationship work for years now, but it didn't always start that way. I was in the corporate world for many, many years in a totally unrelated field. I have background in criminology and psychology as well, and my corporate job was unrelated from that. It was, it's been a journey to get here. I launched my online business back in 2017, originally doing like holistic nutrition and fitness, and that very quickly, virtually as soon as I started it, I was like, no, this isn't the thing. This isn't the thing.
Yeah.
I was, I quit my job, and I was 6 months into doing this full time, and I'm like, this isn't the thing. And simultaneous to that, I was in a 9-year relationship as well, and we owned a house together. I thought this was it. I thought this was the thing. And a few months after I had left my corporate job, I was full time online and having kind of a hard time because I'm like, I don't know what to do. I worked so hard to build this up, and this isn't feeling right. And on Christmas Eve of that year, so this was back in 2018, my partner at the time, his former girlfriend, came to our door to inform me that he had been having an affair off and on with her our entire 9 years together.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that was a shock.
Wow.
And then there were other details that came out in the aftermath, like the secret house 170 meters down the road from our driveway. Yeah. There was a lot going on. Yes. Oh, so was I. So
wow.
I ended the relationship. I sold everything. I moved to Bali for a year, then came back to Canada when the pandemic started. And just from the very beginning, I vowed that I was not going to allow that experience to prevent me from trusting in a relationship. I was very intentional about wanting to allow it once I had healed from it and fully healed, to actually allow that kind of hurt to actually crack me open, to go deeper into love. And I wanted to make sure that I pulled every single ounce of my own responsibility from it, that I explored that. Like, how did I co-create this dynamic? It's very easy.
Which is so big.
Yes.
That's so brave of you, because a lot of people, they end a relationship and they just go to the next, and they never ask themselves, did I, even in cheating, and a lot of people won't look at themselves. And I commend you for that, because I think that that's so difficult for a lot of people to do, but it's so necessary, because you may just repeat that.
It's the only way to heal.
Without knowing.
Yeah, it is truly the only way to heal, because otherwise you will just continue to repeat the same dynamics over and over again.
Yeah.
And there is so much gold in there. Like, yes, it's hard to look at those aspects of ourselves, but that's what's really needed. So in and amongst all of that, I switched into relationship work, and all the people around me had been really pushing me to do it for a very long time. And I'd been really resistant to doing it. Because I thought, well, who wants to learn about relationships from the girl who got cheated on for 9 years? Like, I had been exploring relational work for so long. And even when I initially started my business, a lot of what I did actually would kind of turn into relationship work, even though that wasn't how I intended it. And when I switched into working with relationships, it was like everything just started to flow. And this is so, this sense of purpose within me is so deeply rooted in exploring this from all angles. And a lot of that has come from exploring that in my own life. I think that that's one of the best teachers, right? We can read all the books and take all the courses, and I do those things too. I'm the world's biggest nerd when it comes to all of those things. And
you and me both.
Yes.
I love it. This is, I think, why we connected so much. Like, I see so much of myself in you.
Yeah.
And it's been... like, even just following you over the last couple of weeks, I think it's been a month now, but I'm so encouraged by you, because I feel like I have a very similar desire and passion within me. And I just wanted to tell you that, like, it's super encouraging. That's why I feel like I met you for a reason. Like, this is so random. Like, you're literally a stranger to me. But like, I don't know. I thank you for stepping out and doing that, because I just think your life is so beautiful now. Like, you would have missed out on so much had you not. And it's encouragement to me, because I'm kind of in a weird space of also like, do I pursue this? Do I go after this 100%? But so I love your passion for it, and you are so gifted at what you do. Like, even just hearing like, I've been listening to a lot of your podcast episodes, and I just want to encourage you that you are so gifted, and you approach it in such a like an approachable way. Like, I don't know. I feel so seen and heard by you. I'm like, this woman's amazing. So I just encourage you and thank you for stepping out and following that.
Oh my gosh, I received that. Thank you so much. Like, past versions of me, and this is part of what we're going to talk about, would not have been able to receive that, because I would have been like, oh no, that's too much. Like, and what about you? And that shows up in our relational dynamics too, right? Like, where are we pushing away?
It does.
So thank you. I fully received that. And that took me years to be able to receive even just compliments like that. And sometimes I still have to catch myself. Like, someone told me last night that they really liked my shirt, and I immediately was like, oh my God, it's so old. And I'm like, no, we're not doing that.
Don't do it.
Thank you. So thank you.
I love that.
I know what that's like, and I continue to be so inspired by other people doing work and seeing what they're doing. And we all are going to have days where it's like, should I really be doing the way, like, why am I getting out of bed in the morning? Does anyone care? So podcasting in particular can be tricky sometimes, right? Because we sit in front of a screen and we record this thing and we throw it out to the world and we're like, who the fuck's listening? I don't know. Is anybody listening to this?
Literally. Yeah. That's how I'm like, I don't know. Like, I'm just doing it. I'm committing to it. I'm like, I felt called to do it. I wasn't like, oh, I want to do a podcast. Like, I was like, a podcast? Like, I don't want to do a podcast.
Yeah.
But it's and well, yeah, like, again, we'll see where it goes, but it's like, I just feel like I'm committed to it, because even the few comments I get back from people that are like, wow, I feel heard. I'm thank you for broaching tough topics. Especially like for me, like the Christian community, so much doesn't get spoken of. And so that's why I want to create this platform, because I'm like, there's a lot of topics we're scared to talk about. Yes, yet they affect all of us. And so, I think that segues kind of into what we're going to be talking about today. Is it's the reason why I'm having you on, and the reason why I want to talk about this is because over the last couple months, again, in my community, I talk to a lot of people. Now that people know I have a podcast, everyone comes to me and is like, I'm going to talk to you about my dating life, or it comes up, or whatnot, And just my own personal experiences over the last couple months as well. I just have this notion, and I'm this curiosity of like, are we our own worst enemy? Are we standing in our own way to finding the thing that we really want, right? The things that we say that we really want. Are we ready? Do we even know what that feels like? Are we going to know what it feels like when it comes to us? Because I don't think it's going to feel like the fairy tale we think it's going to feel like, And so that's, I think, your episode 371, it was, what was the title? It was Learning to Open and Receive Love in a Healthy Relationship. I think that was so eye-opening for me. So that's what I want to talk about today is, what does healthy love feel like when it, lands on your doorstep, let's say, because I feel like it's not what we expect it to feel like. And sometimes it makes us want to run, I think when we're so used to having, and they're not all toxic relationships, right? I don't want to say, oh, I had, but if you have, relationships that were toxic, or you were kind of breadcrumbed, or you were with someone who just wasn't really choosing you, right? They were half in, half out. Someone who wasn't really sure they wanted to be in a relationship, right? So all those things, or someone who just wasn't right for you. You were both committed, but you were like, we're not right for each other, right? So it's like all those relationships previous. I think when you then you finally meet a healthy version of someone who you're like, wow, we could be partners. This is wow, so much unexpected things come up, and I don't think we realize that. I think when you have had a trail of misfit relationships.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple things I want to touch on there, and then I'll swing it into the healthy relationship part, because I'm really particular with my clients and the people that I work with around, first of all, one thing being language. I think that the words we use hold so much power, that words have the power to heal or harm. Like, we can cut someone down to nothing, or we can use it to lift other people up. And
absolutely.
I don't use the terminology, referring to people as toxic or referring to relationships as toxic. Another one is referring to people as narcissists. I will not use that terminology. And the reason being is that I'll start with the toxic piece. The toxic piece is we're still kind of pointing outside of ourselves. We're like, okay, well, they're toxic. And if we're someone who has had a string of so-called toxic relationships, guess what? We're the common denominator. Like, and if it was toxic for us, it was toxic for them too, for the other person.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't good for either party. And when we can actually own that, that's when we get to actually heal and move on. Like, we get to start to look at some of the underlying dynamics that are creating that. And it's a lot more empowering than just sitting there going, oh, I always end up in toxic relationships. That keeps you in a very disempowered victim state where you can't
I was going to say it's
forward.
A victim mentality.
Yeah. That's not to say that some relationships are not unhealthy and shouldn't end. Like, I absolutely think that some of them should not work out, right? Like, some of them are not meant to be long term.
Yeah, they're not meant to be.
But everyone who comes into our lives, it's creating an opportunity for growth for both parties.
Yeah.
And the narcissist piece, I hear this thrown around so much in the dating world these days. And the problem with it is that it's not my job to diagnose anyone. I'm not a mental health professional, and it is not my job to diagnose anyone. And narcissism is also a spectrum. So we all are narcissistic to a degree. Human beings have narcissistic tendencies. And some people have more than others. That is absolutely true. But when we put a label on someone, like, oh, they're a narcissist, that's also not only removing our personal responsibility, but it's actually also justifying to other people when we're talking to them about this person who is a narcissist, why we ended up in a relationship with someone who didn't treat us well. And not only are we trying to justify it to them, we're actually trying to justify it to ourselves, to explain to ourselves why I tolerated being mistreated, and simultaneously not really taking a lot of responsibility for, again, how we co-created that dynamic. And there's a reason why I keep pushing this, because the personal responsibility piece, if you can't take personal responsibility, you will end up in the same dynamics showing up in different ways over and over again. They will just play out with different people with different faces, but it will be the same underlying currents that keep showing up, and you're going to feel like you're stuck in Groundhog Day, right? It's not going to go well. Yeah.
No, I think I'm so glad you said that, because I think that it's vital. Like, if you want to grow and you actually want truly what's healthy, you have to look at yourself. Yeah. Like, that's probably my biggest lesson I learned. I think my journey really started, it was in 2019 when a relationship had ended. I couldn't wrap my head around, like, why can't I be in a good relationship? Like, why don't I know what I'm doing? Like, I realized I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what to look for. I didn't, and that was the first time I was like, maybe it's me. Like, what about me? Like, and it is so hard.
It's brave
Like,
to
it
even say that to yourself. Like, oh, it might be me. Like, I might be the problem.
Yeah.
And
well, it's
none
like,
of us are the
I had to
problem,
ask, like, why did I stay? Yeah. Like, why did I stay? What's my own insecurities? What was in me that was like clinging on to a relationship? Like, what was empty? What was missing? What, where it had nothing to do with him. Like, yeah, he had his own and he, whatever. But in the end of the day, I was like, that to me, like you had said, was so much more powerful and did so much more good for me when I was like, but why did I stay?
Right.
Like, so I can complain about him all day long, right? But I already knew that about him. I went in knowing he was like that. Yeah. I knew he XYZ, right? But why did I stay? And I think that, like, I think what you said is really that's so empowering. And I think we get stuck a lot. Like you were saying, you get stuck in this groundhog going after the same people, and the same type of relationships over and over, because we're really not asking, why do I keep going after those type of people? What about them is so attractive? Is my attraction off? Like, why am I so attracted to people who want to run away from me, or people who don't want relationships, or all that? So I think I'm so glad you started with that. I'm so glad you said that, because I really feel like it is at the core, like what we're going to talk about from here on out. To even understand that, it's like, you really have to be in a headspace of where you are able to look at yourself and how you've contributed to your past dating life,
Yeah.
And maybe maybe why you've been single for a long time, or why you haven't found someone. I don't think that's always the case, but I think it helps prepare you for when that right person comes around, regardless of a timeline, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When he
and
comes, so.
In my new book that just came out, You Grow Me, my co-author and I talk about how we don't always fall in love with the person, we fall in love with the stories instead. And the stories that we create around relationships, the stories that we create around who we think we should, so-called, fall in love with. What they're going to look like, how much money they have in their bank account. Like, there's so many women in particular, but men too, just sometimes the list looks slightly different, can have lists basically in their head, if not a physical list, in terms of this type that they're looking for. And it's often very much about physical attributes, economic status, those types of things. And I'm like, throw the list out. How do you want to feel with someone? How do you want to feel? And the more you can start to tap into that, you will be able to better recognize that feeling when it arrives. Now, sometimes you'll still hit like the bumpy part initially where you don't recognize the feeling because the feeling hasn't appeared yet, because you're so uncomfortable with like, this is new and different and weird, and what am I doing? And is this person right? Because we have adjusted to being used to chaos. Our nervous systems have grown so comfortable in chaotic dynamics. Sometimes that can also stem from childhood dynamics with parents and attachment and stuff as well. Then that starts to feel safe because it's comfortable. Yeah. The familiar is what our nervous system recognizes as being safe. So
absolutely.
It's incredibly calm. It feels peaceful. It feels potentially even maybe a little boring. It's like, oh, what? I don't know. Am I as into this person as I think I am? Or can they actually be this great? Why aren't we fighting? Why isn't this harder? Why isn't this an issue? Now, the conflict is another whole situation. We can get into that too, about how necessary. Yes.
Another
the conflict
episode.
is very necessary for healthy relationships to thrive. But it's all part of a healthy dynamic, and yet, when it feels really unfamiliar, we can mistranslate that initially as feeling unsafe. But we need to really go inward and sit with that and be like, is this actually what I'm experiencing? Like, do I feel like I have chemistry and compatibility with this person? How do they make me feel? How does my nervous system feel with them? And a lot of this also requires us to become more connected with our bodies. And a lot of us are running around very disconnected.
Absolutely.
And I work with a lot of women who are really going through that right now. Like they're feeling very disconnected from their bodies. They might even have difficulties like naming some of their emotions sometimes, or and part of the work that we can do around that is, what is the emotion? Where do you feel it in your body? What does it feel like in your body? Sometimes we'll even walk people through meditations of to help pull some of that up. Like, does it have a color? Does it have a texture? Those types of things. And really starting to notice how we are showing up when someone is showing up for us. How are we showing up when things actually are consistent? When it does feel calm? What are we doing? Are we panicking? Because I've gone through that. When I met my now partner,
Oh, girl.
I had always swung a little bit more towards anxious tendencies. And, as I had healed, I'd become far more secure, like much more regulated. But when I started dating him, he is this, incredibly amazing human. I felt so calm around him. He felt like an extension of the inner peace that I had worked so hard to create. And I recognized all of these things. I was super into him. And I started to have a little bit of avoidance come out of me. Like, I kind of wanted to bolt sometimes, like, this is overwhelming. This is too much. I don't know how to receive all of this.
Yeah.
And a lot of that stems from self-worth, too. Like, do we feel worthy of receiving? That's a big key piece that sometimes we have to look at. Even just what we were talking about, like the ability to receive a simple compliment. A lot of us don't have that. And that can be another really big part of this beautiful love coming into your life and deciding if it's the right fit for you or not. Like, how do you want to show up for yourself? How do you want to show up for the other person?
Yeah. Wow. There's so much there. I'm like, oh, it's all so good. But I want to go back to, because I think it stems from all of this, but going back to, how do you want to feel with your person? With that, what is that going to feel like? That has transformed so much for me. I did this book called Calling in the One. I hate the title. I really wish she would change it. But in that book, she does make you walk through. She's like, I don't want you to tell me what he looks like or anything. I want you to write down, what do you feel? And she made us write down a scenario. Give me a day in the life. Give me an hour give me 10 minutes. What would that look like, right? So I went in and I wrote down, like, I want to feel like, I think mine was like, I'm in the kitchen and we're cooking and we're like, have music on and we're dancing and it just feels calm and joyful. And like, you're just describing what you want a simple everyday moment to feel like, right? And having that at the forefront of my mind, when you do meet that person and that does feel, you're like, oh, yes, that's the feeling. And it shuts out all the other noise that you were mentioning. Like, does he have a nice car, or does he, whatever his, okay, I get it. You want financial stability, all that. Those are all still important things because those stem from values. Are they hardworking? Are they that? But again, it goes back to, what are their values? What do they live for? Where are they going? Right? It's not about like, oh, he makes $1 million. But I think that is so important because I think we need to get outside of our parameters of, he needs to be this tall. Like, we put such trivial things on our list, and like you said, they just need to be thrown out. Like that absolutely needs to be thrown out. What are the needs? Like, I think a big one for me was like, I need consistency. I need someone who is consistent, right? I know that my nervous system, I needed that, right? So my list changed. My list went from, like, maybe it needs to be this and that, like to characteristics of the person versus, all that. So I think that that's so important, and it really changes how you date and what you look for, what you're going out there for. But I think then the flip side, like you were saying, once you have that, that's where it's like, when that does come to your doorstep, like that feeling, like oftentimes you do, I think that's, I've experienced that more recently. I can relate to you, is like, you start to get sometimes like a little bit of avoidant tendencies. I was like, oh, this is actually a lot more than I was thinking. Like, consistency is like nerve-wracking. Like, something about someone being super consistent. It is. And I think a real healthy relationship will confront you on so many fronts, right? I think I've been recently more confronted on like, wow, I have so many fears. I didn't even know I was scared of committing. Like, I didn't know that that I don't want to let go of my single life. I didn't know, like, all these things are like coming up where you're like trying to hold on to everything that feels secure, everything that you've built And it's a control thing. And I think you mentioned that in your episode too. You talk about so much of it kind of comes out of like, we just want to control it. So we're like this because you're not used to it, right? You're not used to someone being consistent. You're not used to someone just being like, I like you and I'm here and I'm showing up for you. You're like, but what's the catch? You're not used to that. So it's like you try to then hold on to like everything else that feels normal and, you know, for your nervous system that you're used to.
There's a couple things there. So I want to circle back to the how we want to feel piece for a second, because the only one of the issues with that is that it can sound great in theory, but if we've never actually experienced feeling that way with a partner, we might not even actually know how we do want to feel, because we don't even know what's possible. Right? So then the only thing that we have to base it off of is shit like Hollywood. And that's not a great example, because not only is it a fairy tale and that is not reflective of real life, but if you'll notice, a lot of Hollywood movies tend to start just as, the guy wins over the girl. That's great. That's the early moments where, they have that kiss and then they ride off into the sunset together happily ever after. That does not address the actual relational skills that are required to move through life together, through the hard moments and the good ones, through the ups and the downs, right? Like there's going to be a lot to navigate, and it requires relational skills. The good news is that these skills can be learned. No one comes out of the womb knowing how to do these things. They can all be learned. No. Yeah, they're learnable skills.
We don't learn it.
And
right? We don't learn it.
In learning about that. And it doesn't have to mean that you pay someone. It can mean books and, all of these different resources that you can go to, podcasts like this one, like all of these different things. You get to do that. And that investment, our relationships impact us and impact every corner of our life more than any other factor by far. There are statistics after statistics around this. Marriages will impact how long you live. And one way or the other, if it's a happy relationship, it will help you live longer. If it's an unhappy one, it will shave years off of your life. So we cannot underscore the importance of relationships enough. The other piece that you mentioned around, like almost like grieving your single life, I really wanted to touch on that, because when I got into this relationship, I sort of realized that I was undergoing what I kind of call the grief of getting what I wanted. And it was the idea that not only was I letting go of, and I felt really ready to be in a relationship. So it was surprising to me, but there were layers to it. One was recognizing that my single life, I was not going to have the same level of freedom. And I had worked really hard to enjoy that freedom. Like, as much as I wanted the relationship, I also was all about, and this is what I teach people too, when you're single, maximize that. If you could act from a place of knowing with absolute certainty that your person was going to come into your life, that the right relationship was going to happen for you, how would you show up between now and the time it arrives? And start doing that now. Good. Like, what are you waiting for? Stop waiting for life to happen to you. You're going to have a lot more difficulty getting to that point, and that person is not as likely to even be into you if you're just sitting around on the couch eating bonbons waiting for them to show up on your front door. Like, it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. Like, they also want someone adventurous and all of the things. And I had someone tell me that years ago, and she almost verbatim said what you said. She's like, let's say you knew you were getting married in your 30s, say mid-30s. She goes, how would you live today? I think I was 25. So I'm thinking, like, that's like 10 years from now. Like, oh my God, that's so, I just couldn't believe that was so long ago. But that has always stuck with me. And she had said, how would you live your life knowing that? And a part of me was like, oh, I'm going to like travel and live it up. And I really feel like I'm doing that, and I've done that, And it was such a shift for me. And I'm so glad she asked me that. It's a mentor of mine. Because my whole perspective changed. I was like, yeah, why am I waiting around? Like, if I know for sure I'm going to get married at some point, right? At that point, like, until that point, like, I'm going to use every ounce of this freedom I have, to live it to the fullest. Because I think that's why there's a bit of like, when you do meet the right, there is grieving. I heard a quote from Esther Perel, and she said, with choice comes loss. And it's something that we don't really think about, but it's so true. It's like when you choose, if you are choosing a long-term relationship, right? A marriage, whatever, there is the loss of the single life. There is the loss of certain things, right? And so it's like we have to be cognizant of that to grieve it, to actually let that go in a healthy way, you know? But yeah, I think that that's so important. Is like really living when you're single, really living that in and using that time and opportunity to become the person that you want to be. Like, who do you want to be in a relationship? Not only what you want out of it, but who do you want to be? What do you want to show up as, right? And so often we're always doing the searching. We're always looking for the next thing. And we never take the time in our lives to be like, well, who do I want to be? Who do I want to show up as when I do meet that amazing person I want to be with? And I think that is so transformational. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because I just feel like that mindset is so transformational, because you will then attract the right person, because you will be the right person
and then maintaining
for that person.
that sense of self that you build too. It's not like you just throw everything out the window and put yourself solely into the relationship. You need to maintain that sense of self, and we'll get into that more. But the other thing is with the grief as well is that when we get rid of the list of, you know, these certain attributes that we want someone to have, and instead focus on how we want to feel. And then the right person comes in. This happened with my partner. He comes in. I'm feeling all these feels, and I'm like, oh my God, like he's better than I even imagined, and I still maintain that. And he didn't come to me in the exact package that I thought he would. And what I mean by that in his particular instance is that, just as one example, he's been married twice, and I didn't love exes hanging around, given my history. I was like, ooh, this is, and he has two incredible boys that I am so in love with. I just adore, and they add so much to my life. It just wasn't what I had initially anticipated. Like I didn't plan in my head. I don't plan on having like birthing any of my own children, and so I didn't necessarily just have that in mind. So I think I had painted this story in my head without actually even realizing it, despite all the work I'd done and everything else. I think that there was sort of a subconscious narrative playing out a little bit, and he showed up in a different package. And I'm like, oh. And what I very quickly realized was he came with everything I'd ever wanted and didn't even know I'd needed. And right? And that's so good. The key that I really want to underscore is being open. Coming back to being open over and over again, especially if you're someone who is sitting there going, I don't know how the fuck I want to feel with someone, because I've never experienced a healthy relationship, and I don't have any, models in my life perhaps of what a healthy dynamic even looks like. First of all, cultivate those feelings from within of like how you want to feel on your own for yourself. Like go within always. That's always one of the biggest keys. And then recognizing that you get to cultivate even more of that with someone else, and just being open to how it arrives. Yes. That is such a crucial key component.
Yes.
Yeah.
So crucial. So crucial, because I like we were saying earlier, we put so many parameters on it, right? And I think, again, it comes out of control, out of fear, out of so many things. Like, we have to control what it's going to look like. And I really feel like usually it doesn't look like what we think it's going to look like. I would bet to say the best things don't. And I look back at my life too, and every time something has been dropped into my lap, like a beautiful thing that I was waiting for, praying for, wanting for, I was like, wow, I would have never thought of it this way. Like, I would have never thought this was what it was going to be, And, more recently, I started dating someone. Again, I don't know if we're down the road what's happening, but this is just more recent. But he also surprised me and came in a totally different package than I would have ever imagined. But there's so many components there that I'm like, yes, these are all the things I've been wanting and looking for, right? Time will tell. But I think we met in person, had I went online, for us, we have a bigger age gap. I would have cut the age 7 years, 8 years, maybe, maybe even younger. I would have cut that gap a lot more. And and it's like I just put a parameter on myself for what? A fear, for the unknown, for having, and so I'm right there with you, and I feel that I truly think that there are people out there that are for us that just may not look like what we say that we think we want. And I think it's because it comes back to fear. It's the unknown, right? Someone who has kids, I don't know what that's going to be like. I don't have kids. I don't know what that looks like, in a relationship. But are you open to it? Are you open to healthy love coming to you however it comes, however it arrives, right? And whatever package it arrives, because your life can totally change, And it's like it so much goes back to practice, but I think that's the practice, like you were saying, that happens in your singleness. Is, are you willing to take more risk? Are you willing to look at life differently and take those risks and look at things that maybe you're like, wow, I never imagined that, but like, I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna try these things, right? Getting out of our comfort zones, I think, is a huge practice you can do in your singleness, right? You can try something hard, do something new. These are small practices that I feel like we can be doing when we're not in a relationship, right? To kind of gear us up, like little baby steps to like bigger, more challenging, risks that we have to take. So I could not agree anymore with just being open to what comes our way, because a lot of the things, like the fears that we put up and the parameters, they're not the things that make a long lasting relationship. They're not the things that, they're most of the time they're just trivial.
Exactly.
And they make us feel comfortable.
Because it's probably old patterns playing out, right? And even in the healthiest of relationships, we're still going to see like old patterns come up sometimes and come to the surface, and new layers that need to be healed and stuff. Like, that's normal.
And then you have new ones.
And it's all there to come up. And I just that's why my co-author and I titled our book "You Grow Me," because it's the idea of you grow me as opposed to you complete me. And when we can approach relationships from a growth-oriented perspective, it also takes some of the pressure off.
Yes.
Because if we're looking for someone else to complete us, you can very quickly take the healthiest of relationships that comes in such a beautiful way and like gives you the scary feels, but you go for it and all the things. And that relationship can quickly wither if either party is putting the pressure on that relationship, even subconsciously, of expecting the other person to complete us. But instead, if we can look at everything as a growth opportunity, even every conflict, every disagreement that comes up is a growth opportunity to deepen not only into an understanding of yourself and a better understanding of the other person, but of the human experience and of the relationship. And it can deepen it in such a powerful way. Like, that is actually where a lot of the relational magic comes from, is from the disagreements and working through that compassionately, like holding each other through that, holding yourself through that. When your nervous system maybe starts to freak out a little bit, like you get to do that work, and all of that builds the self-trust that reassures you that you've got this. You get to reassure yourself that you can move through this, and it is also normal and human to get reassurance from your partner. I just want to put that out there, because in our Instagram world, it's like, validate yourself. Like, you don't need other people.
Oh, man.
It's
Those kill me.
Become like hyper independent. And I think that can be really damaging.
Yes.
I, again, am one of those recovering people who was like the hyper independent, strong, independent woman, right? I'm like, I've got this. It's very difficult to receive when you're in that energy. And what you get to do is you still get to be an independent, whole, complete human. And you get to create interdependence with somebody else. And again, that openness, like, a question I come back to, there's two questions actually I come back to a lot. One is, am I acting out of fear or out of love right now? And in a relationship, that's a really, like, you'll know right away in your being which one it is if you ask yourself that question. The other question is, how can I show up in a way that I will be proud of 5, 10, 20 years from now? And that's another really key piece, especially, if there's fears coming up around a healthy relationship. My biggest rule that I have with myself is I don't want to live with what ifs. I just don't. Like, I don't want to look back on something and be like, oh, I wonder what that dynamic could have turned into. I wish I had opened more. I wish I had, been kinder, more compassionate. Of course, like we're all going to have those moments, but doing that as much as we can to come back to how can I show up right now in a way that I will be proud of and be able to be like, fuck yeah, like I went for it. All right, I did the thing. And it takes so much bravery. Relationships in general take bravery. Being a human requires so much bravery every single day. And then we add more humans into it and it requires even more of us. And that is where our aliveness gets to come forth. Like that is the spark of life to me. Yeah.
That's life. I was going to say, when you said that's the beauty of life, you know, it's and when you experience that,
it is.
It's magical. Like it really is magical. It's, you know, and you finally realize like you have a lot more control of you internally, yourself, right? There's just this piece of like, it's a peace, it's calming. It's like, oh, I'm okay. I've got, you know, I've got me. Like I you know, and it's and acting out of that, it really is, it's beautiful, it's magical, even in the arguments, even if something comes up and all those things, like there's it's kind of indescribable. It's just beautiful.
You know, so much of the work that I do with clients is nervous system regulation. And the other piece, I always see the nuance in everything. This is why I'm never able to give like short answers.
Yeah, I love it.
Nervous system regulation is so key. And there's so many things that we can do to expand our nervous systems and to ultimately expand our emotional range. Because I truly believe that that's the biggest reason why we're here as humans. Is, you know, when we start as infants, we have a very limited emotional range because we have so little understanding and interaction in the world. Ultimately, like it's so small. And then as we have more human experiences, it expands and we get to experience a larger spectrum. And what it sometimes means is that allowing ourselves to experience deeper depths of pain, when you have those moments, when life's, right? We all have those moments. What I have learned over the years is that I trust in those moments that that's actually going to allow me to access even higher levels of joy and the lighter, brighter emotions as a direct result, because it's expanding the range. Yeah. They're deeply connected. And having a deep understanding of one allows us to have a very deep understanding of the other. It doesn't mean they're necessarily going to happen at the exact same time. Like sometimes those seasons are longer than we would necessarily like. It's not super comfy. But it also allows us to have more appreciation when those moments arrive. The other piece with nervous system regulation, though, and kind of to play the opposite of this, is that sometimes if we get to such a regulated place, I think that we can actually end up shutting ourselves off from experiencing the more vulnerable, messy moments, like expressing the anger. Like really, nervous system regulation isn't about controlling our anger or controlling our sadness or, you know, controlling our emotions. It means that we have the capacity to hold the emotions that come up, that we can hold them. And that sometimes still means expressing it. My partner and I had a moment the other day, and, you know, in past relationships, it has not always been safe for me to express anger. And this relationship is in a different stratosphere than anything else I've ever experienced. And we've been together a year at this point, and like it just continues to surprise me in the best possible ways. And it's really rare for me to get really angry where like I express it in a big way. Like I can be like, I'm angry, but I don't necessarily have like an yes.
Same. I'm very like this.
So I had a moment where we had been in conflict, and I think this has only ever happened one other time in a relationship. And I just like I wasn't yelling at him, and it wasn't even saying words. It was just like just getting it out. And yes,
you're like, just
and
instantly
where I'm at, the energy shifted, because leading up to that, I'd been like super kind of sad and down. The energy shifted. He's like, "Oh yeah, this is new. Let's work with this. What do you got here? Let's go with this."
You're like, is she gonna yell?
And it shifted the energy where we all of a sudden became instantaneously so playful, and it was kind of like a silly playful, but we were still getting things out, and like that messy vulnerability is key. It is key, and I spent so much of my life, and sometimes I still see this coming up in my relationship, and I work on this, is that it's okay to be messy. And again, that level of vulnerability is where connection can actually be formed. And when we deny our partners
100%.
having that experience of us, we're actually not allowing them to see us. And then we end up feeling unseen, misunderstood, unheard,
Unseen.
because we're not actually allowing them in. Like, let it be messy. Allow them to experience you in your mess. Because then they're going to see those parts of you. And guess what? They probably won't run. It's going to be like, oh my God, I can actually be a mess and they're still here. And we need to know that sometimes. And that goes for anyone. Everyone needs to have the experience of being seen in their mess to one degree or another, and to know that they are still safe to express that. Not every relationship can hold that, but a healthy one, since
No, and that's going to be my next thing I was going to say to that is like, and that's okay, because that's information for you. That tells me you are not my safe space. You can't handle all of me, right? You can't handle that space. And usually this is, again, it's information, right? It's usually someone who is not able to sit with their own emotion and their own ish, right? So they can't sit with yours. If they can't sit with theirs, they're not able to sit with yours, you know? And so, yes, exactly. And so when that does happen, it's like, don't let that stop you from opening up, from showing who you are, from showing a little bit of that mess, right? For fear of them leaving. Because if they leave, thank you. Thank you for telling me what I needed to know. If they stay, you're like, okay, now it's a little scary because you do see all of it and now you're here.
That's the confronting
and
part.
You're staying. And that, again, more information.
Yes.
That's the confronting part. And that actually segues into, what I want to get into too, is like, kind of going back to that nervous system. It's so key. I'm learning so much more about that right now in my life, like trying to reduce stress and all that. I even realized like so much of my stress is actually not even coming from external things. It's from my own, like, I have to do all this stuff, like just this mental state that I've created for my own world that I'm like, I don't know why I'm making myself more stressed
Are we weird as
than
humans?
I actually need to be.
We're so weird.
Very interesting. Learning a lot about that. It is insane. We're so weird. I'm literally like, my cortisol levels are so high. I'm literally doing this to myself half the time. It's just my own. But anyway, I think when we do tune into ourselves a lot more, I think this is when, and I'm speaking to people like, you have done the work, you are working on yourself, you have read the books, you've gone to therapy, all the things, you feel more into yourself, right? You've done all the things. And now you're like, okay, cool. I want a partner. I'm ready. I want somebody, a lot of it is our nervous system totally not being ready, or totally just being like shocked, like, wow, this is, and I think you talked about that in your podcast, but it's, I think that's like, when you get to that point, that's something you have to kind of sit back and be like, where are these feelings coming from, right? Where is all this kind of stemming from? Because it can be so nerve-wracking, and when we are confronted with the things that we say that we really want. And I think, like we were saying now, there's so much practice that comes in that is understanding what's happening for us, But I'd love to hear from you. Like, I know you mentioned kind of your past relationship and kind of coming into this new one. Like, what are the things that we kind of should be looking for, but just to be aware of that might come up when you do meet a healthy individual or you're in a healthy relationship? Like, what are some feelings? Because I feel like sometimes we tend to want to bolt, like, I'm feeling, maybe I'm not really attracted to them anymore. Maybe I don't like them. I'm going to leave. Like, I think we tend to leave too prematurely. And so I want people to press into those moments a bit more, because I do feel like, I think a lot of it is our own-ish again. And so I just want to hear from you, like, what are some of those things that may come up that we should be mindful of? Like, hey, like, you've done the work, you've done all the things to prepare yourself for this moment. Doesn't mean the work ends, but just to get you to here, right? Because there's more work to be done when you're in the relationship, right? I got here, but now what are the things I should even be aware of that may come up when I do meet a healthy partner?
The biggest one that comes to mind for me is just straight up fear. And we can talk about stuff like attachment styles and everything all day long, but whether someone identifies as more avoidant or anxious. By the way, I have like a whole thing around that too, in terms of like labeling, and Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we've talked about that here. Yep.
But I do think that attachment theory in general is incredibly useful. I just think that a lot of us are like misusing it in terms of labels for people. Yes.
I agree. I'm really passionate about attachment theory, but the more I'm getting into this work,
for growth.
I'm
right?
also
Like
leaning with you
can
toward
do a lot of work on your own, but like
and more understanding
doing work when you're like with a partner and being triggered in these ways
I lean
is
more
like
anxious, but these are the reasons why. And when it, because like I said, I had avoidant tendencies recently. Like where did that come from? So now I'm an avoidant. Like now it gets confusing. So, but I'm with you on that. It's the less labeling, more trying to understand the root. The labels
to
help
use when it's like when your
but I just
feelings are at
don't want us to get stuck
right?
in like, I'm avoidant or I'm only this or they're all meant to help and to give some framework. But I'm leaning more toward that too. Is like I want to get to less labeling.
And like you feel that
I'm seeing it in my own life. Like what? But I'm now I'm avoidant. Now I'm
so
it gets very confusing. But yeah,
rather than just like knowing it intellectually.
Binary boxes, like it just. The human experience is too layered for that, in my opinion, and it shows a very narrow view and kind of lack of depth of understanding of the human experience in a lot of ways. And yes, it can absolutely be useful in terms of identifying patterns within ourselves and just increasing our levels of understanding as long as we're open to it just being part of the conversation, not the entire thing. And yes, so I think a really big part of that, and I don't remember where I was going with that point originally, but
the fear coming up when we meet.
Because
thank you for having me.
Really come to
an
the
absolute
surface.
blast.
And
I really
I started feeling so many fears that I was feeling crippled by it, and every fear under the sun was coming up. And I finally did this exercise
I'm on Instagram. If you want to follow me at Dr. Alexia H.
Yeah.
My website's
and
really
I
good
recommend
way,
this
so
to clients and
it's
stuff too because it's
livewellpsychologygroup.com.
I literally took
I will
every single
also give a little
fear
plug.
I
recently created an
online
online course with a nutritionist and a yoga teacher for it's
really
just like this holistic,
incredibly
amazing
very
healing course for women called the Self-Healing Toolkit.
She said to me,
so any of that kind of
like,
jumps out at you, you can always like DM me on Instagram, send me
a message
to my website, but would love to.
No, I'm not falling in love. What are you talking? No, I'm not. I'm not falling in love.
Not.
He's not my boyfriend. I'm not falling in love. Just the total opposite of how I had showed up in past relationships before. And I realized that all of these fears were crippling me. And it was everything from, ultimately, that was what I meant to say about the attachment styles, is that ultimately under both of those, anxious and avoidant, if we're just going to look at those two for a quick moment, is fear. Mm-hmm. It's the same. It's ultimately the same thing. It just presents in different ways, and at the root of both of it is fear. And I was experiencing all these fears, so I decided to write down every single fear I was having, no matter how absurd it sounded, no matter how ridiculous, over the top, like, oh my God, Emily, in 1,000 years that wouldn't happen. Get it all out, like just write them all down. And I made a list. And I think by the time I finished the list, it was something like 5,000 words. Like, it was absurd. I realize I'm a writer too, but it was absurd.
Oh,
so then I went through like every single fear, every single one of them, and I coached myself through it. I was like, okay, if this was, and even if you're not a coach, you just, if your best friend was coming to you with this fear, what would you tell them? What would you tell your friend? And just look at it through that lens. And I coached myself through every single one of them. And what I realized was that either the fears were either completely unfounded, totally like absolutely absurd, unfounded, not even going to happen. Yes.
You're just making them up.
You're just like the planet Mars like explodes, like that level of just ridiculous. Or they were ones that when I realized, I'm like, okay, if this so-called worst case scenario happens, I've already lived through worst case scenario and I can figure it out. I've got this. It's okay. Like, I will be able to navigate this. And the big key there is the self-trust. And we kind of talked about this a little bit, like the self-trust that gets built and the taking responsibility for the dynamics that we have co-created in the past. Those are the keys. Because then when we get into another situation, and these lessons apply to all of life, not just relationships, but they come to the surface the most with relationships.
Yeah.
We can trust that we've got ourselves. it's like, okay, I've got you. I've got you.
Yeah.
And moving through that exercise was incredibly powerful, and it shifted a lot. The other thing that shifted a lot was working through conflicts with my partner. And it was beautiful because I was like, I've never had conflicts with this, but because of all of the work I had done and he approached it the same way, I wasn't hiding my true desires. I was like, no, this is who I am. This is who I am. Like, and if you don't want it, that's okay. And yes, of course, there's still like a little bit of fear under there. No one wants to be rejected, but I was secure enough within myself and my own sense of self-worth that it was like, if this isn't going to work out, I trust that there's something out there better for me. And I trust that I will pull the necessary growth that I require, the necessary lessons out of this, whether we stay together or not, that will serve me as an individual in life and in relationships. Like, this is what relationships are here to gift us with. And when we stop measuring the success of the relationship on how long it lasts, the dynamic changes. And in a lot of ways, those are the dynamics that are actually more likely to last for the long term. If we take the pressure off.
Yes. Well, and I think, 100%. I feel like when we put the pressure on, we're like, it just doesn't work. And I feel like when you're so grounded in yourself, right? And you're like, I'm okay with or without this relationship. That's the mentality you got to walk into something healthy. I don't need you to complete. I don't need you, period. I don't need, what you go into that, you want them. That difference is like, you want to be in this. I'm choosing to be in this. I think when you can go in with that mindset, you go in with an open hand. You're going in saying, this is me. My hands are open. I'm not clenching to death that relationship. Because often when we're scared and fearful, and usually more on the anxious, and we haven't really done that work on our own to be okay within our own selves, right? We clench to these relationships. We hold on for dear life because we're like, this is our identity, right? This has to work. I have to make this work, right? And we stay in the wrong dynamic so many times and I'm talking about just in the dating. I'm not even talking about marriage. Like I'm saying, before you even get married, like we still do this. We cling on to life for these relationships. But the beauty of a healthy relationship is you walk in open-handed. You walk in being like, I don't need you to complete me. I don't need that type of pressure in this relationship. Like, I want to be in this. I'm choosing to stand in front of you and to be vulnerable. I am making this as an active choice. And that really is what love is. Love is not holding on for dear life. Love is, this is scary as shit, and I'm standing in front of you and I'm being vulnerable, and this is who I am. I don't know if you like it or not, but this is me. And someone being like, yeah, I'm down. I like this. This is cool. I'm in. Let's do this. Like, I am in. That is healthy love. That is healthy relationship. And that is scary because you have zero control over that answer on the other end. But on the other end, it's like this unknown beauty of valley. I think of like, it's like honey and all this like,
so juicy.
Honey and flowers. And it's right. Like that's the feeling, but it's like, that's the feeling. That's what's on the other side. It doesn't come without conflict. It doesn't come with any of that. But that's not the goal. We're not looking for perfection and utopia where there's like absolutely nothing bad happens, right? And I think that's what I think about, like to know that you're ready to be in that type of relationship. I think that's the marker is, am I okay with or without this person? Am I okay with her? That is when you know you are walking in open-handed. Because I know for me, like, and I look at that, I'm like, God, you give and take, right? So I'm like, I'm coming in like, oh yeah, I'm open, right? But like my identity is not going to be wrapped up in this. My identity isn't going to be wrapped up in it. And when you take off that pressure in a relationship, it is like, it's beautiful. It's almost amazing. You get to create from that space, right? Like, I don't know. I think we look at relationships more just like, what do I get out of it? What can I get out of this? As a transaction. Relationships and love are not transactions, right? You're not giving this to get this. You're giving to give, period. You're sacrificing to sacrifice, period. You're not expecting anything in return. And that's the beauty of the relation. That's the beauty of what we're talking about and what we're, advocating for. And it's scary and it's difficult to get there. I think it requires a lot of yourself to get there. But I think when you do get there, it's the best feeling. It's the best thing I think you can experience in terms of relationship. Because like you said, like seeing what you two are creating also, right? You guys, you get to this place, right? And you're like, oh, it's not just about us. It's not just about you and me. It's about also what this relationship is creating in this world. And that is better examples, better relationships, helping other. Like there's so much that comes out of our relationships. And I think if we think of relationship as bigger than ourselves, it's so much more beautiful. And it's way less conflict and way less of the issues because you think, why am I fighting for this selfish thing? Like this relationship means more than the both of us, right? This relationship means more than each of us individually. And
I love that. No,
sorry, I
love
had a monologue
it.
right there because I was feeling
for
really
it. That was so beautiful, and I couldn't have said that better myself. It's so true. Like creating something that is, my partner and I have talked about this a lot. That one of the things that we're really committed to is continuously co-creating a relationship that is inspiring, but not so much inspiring to other people. That's more of a byproduct. It needs to be inspiring to each of us, like both individually and together.
Yes,
and then
absolutely.
The natural byproduct of that is if it's inspiring to other people, beautiful. Like but I'm not setting out as a goal to be, some like Instagram couple goal. No. Like right before we got on, I just posted a video where he and I went to record an episode about conflict, and we got into a conflict about creating the episode. And at the very beginning of the video, I'm like crying, and then he's like, "We're rolling." I didn't even know he'd hit record, and then I start laughing. It is just like hilarious. I already had a girlfriend message me. She's like, I am both crying and laughing my way through this episode because you two are just like ridiculous.
That's
but yes,
so
it's bigger than
funny.
us. It's bigger than us.
I love that.
And I talk about this term, again, my co-author and I came up with this for the book, called confident detachment. And it's basically exactly what we're talking about here in terms of like showing up open, allowing the other person to see our genuine, authentic selves, and then letting the chips fall. And if you're not the right person for them, they weren't the right person for you either.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to bring it back to that point. Like, rejection sucks, but also it's protection. It's redirection. There's so many like other things that are wrapped up in that we can't necessarily see in the moment, but trust. I'm going to bring it back to this over and over again. And I've lived enough life to see that if you stick around for a while, it ends up working itself out. And then sure, there'll be something else. But then you've built more trust within yourself, within the journey, within the process, within the universe, whatever you want to believe in, that you know that there's going to be something else that follows that later. And who knows how long? We can't control the timelines. But there's going to be something that follows that. And it's up to you. It's your job to take everything that you can from the experience and to allow all of you, as much as you possibly can, to shine through, because you are a unique spiritual being. There is no one else like you in the world. You are more unique than a fingerprint. And when you show up from that place, it is going to be impossible to not attract the right people to you. But you have to be you because there's no one else who is you.
Yeah. Exactly. And if you're not okay with that, then that gets pointed back to yourself. I'm like, I've got work to do. If I am not okay showing up
and what a beautiful
as
thing.
Me.
Right?
Whether
that
that's
doesn't
accepted
depend
or
on someone
rejected.
else. Like
And
we get to do
beautiful,
that work.
because you get to decide that. And that's vital for stepping
100%.
into everywhere you go in life, right? Your job, maybe a job you're wanting to have, pursuing a career you think you're not qualified for, whatever it is. Like I have learned so much over the years. It's like, I just have to show up as me. That's it. That's all I'm required to do. And God will kind of work out the rest for me, right? Like a lot of it's like the things will work out. They'll fall where they're supposed to in that. But you showing up as a fake version of you isn't going to get you anywhere. You will end up being unhappy because you have to now maintain that version of you, right? You have to maintain that version of you in a relationship, right? And it's exhausting. It's exhausting to do that. And so, I think that's the beauty of it. I think we've that is where we can even conclude. That is, I think, the key.
Yeah, I think so
I really
too.
do that. I think that's like a huge key to to a healthy relationship and to being prepared and ready for that on the receiving end, to start. Because again, like we talked about earlier too, like a healthy relationship will be so confronting. And if you haven't already done that work on your own prior of confronting yourself, it'll be really hard. Like you think a healthy relationship will be so hard and difficult for you if you meet someone unhealthy. So I think a lot of that, my encouragement to everyone who's single right now is like, this is the time you get to do that. You get to look back at your life. You get to work on those things. You get to you can work on them in your friendships. You can work on them in your family relationships. You can work on them in so many different ways. But I think so much of it comes down to that: confront yourself first, then get confident in who you are, right? Trust who you are. Trust your decision making, but trust those things as you work through that. And, the rest will fall as it will.
Oh my gosh. Couldn't agree more.
In a simple way. Oh, Emily, thank you so much for coming. We could talk for hours. I was already like, I could talk to you for the next 5 hours, but I thank you so much. I would love to have you back on. I also would love to have you and your partner on one of these days. I think that would be such a fun episode. I think that would be great. And as my audience grows and this expands and stuff, I want more people to know you and also take a look at your work. Obviously, we'll put everything in the show notes so you guys can go. I'll put those 2 episodes also that I referenced because it pertains. She goes even more in depth about this topic. And like I said, I think I've listened to them 3 times already. So I'll put them in the show notes for everyone to go listen because it's some really great content. Also, if you were interested in coaching with Emily, we'll put all that information as well. She's fantastic. Highly, 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 highly recommended because she really knows her stuff and she's been doing this for quite a while. But thank you. Any little bits of how we get in touch with you? We'll obviously put all that in there, but any last remarks?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm delighted to do this. I would love to come back. We'll definitely make that happen. My partner and I are happy to come back. Yeah, I work with people individually, and then my partner and I also work with couples as a couple too. And we're loving doing that. It's really, really cool.
Oh, great. Love that.
And I do recommend, because it ties in so well with this episode, my new book, You Grow Me. It's available on Amazon and highly recommend. Thank you.
And congrats on that.
Yeah,
that's
and
huge.
it is completely unlike any relationship book you have read. And it ties in so perfectly with everything we've been talking about in terms of creating your genuine, authentic self and allowing that to come through, and then how that impacts relationships. And super excited for that. So
amazing. I'm gonna have to get that book because I would love to read it. So I'll have to buy it and add it to my list because I already know I'm gonna probably read it.
You'll have to tell me what you think. I'm excited to hear your review.
So eat it up. But I will. No, I'll read it and then I'll absolutely let you know. I think that'd be awesome. But thank you again. Thank you so much. Truly, I really hope whoever's listening, you guys get something out of this. I think it's been transformational for me and very helpful for me in my phase of life right now. And I just thank you for your time.
I appreciate you.
Appreciate it.